Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Allahumma 'allimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa faqihna idha jahilna wa zidna 'ilman nafi'an wa 'amalan mutaqabbalan ya kareem wa ba'd. Today hopefully will be our final session on this course, these series of lectures about how to deal with the process of death and dying. There's quite a bit that we want to get through today. It's actually going to be quite a packed session today, so I want to move through this quickly. There are two main issues we're going to look at. One is after somebody's suffered a loss within the family, the guidance that Allah subhanahu and the Prophet have given around certain issues, specific issues, and that's the process of bereavement. And then the second very important issue that we're going to look at is an introduction into the process of how to distribute the wealth of the deceased, so looking at the issue of wills and inheritance. An introduction, a simple introduction into how the process works. So the first part we're going to discuss is issues around bereavement. We're going to look at 5 different issues, 5 specific issues. The first, when a man dies who's married, we have an issue around the iddah of a woman. The waiting period of the wife of someone who's just died. So we'll discuss some issues around that. And then also some ahkam around what's known as ta'ziyah. Ta'ziyah is offering condolences to the family of someone who's died. And then in addition we'll look at how the Prophet ﷺ, he advised us and he gave us glad tidings and hope when you lose a child. When you lose your child, how to overcome the loss. Providing food for the family of the deceased, which is a sunnah that the Prophet ﷺ taught us. And the last issue we're going to look at is the question that's discussed around Isal al-Thawab. Isal al-Thawab, sending rewards on to the soul of the deceased. So those are the 5 issues we'll look at around bereavement, what happens when a person has died. So the first thing that we look at, iddah, the issue of iddah. Iddah is the waiting period that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set and fixed for a woman whose husband has died. We have the ayah in the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, وَالَّذِينَ يَتَوَفَّوْنَ مِنْكُمْ وَيَذَرُونَ أَزْوَاجٍ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةَ أَشْهُرٍ وَعَشْرًا. Those who die amongst you leaving widows, their waiting period, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, is 4 months and 10 days. 4 months and 10 days. Originally, the waiting period, and we're going to look at what are the key issues around this waiting period. But originally the waiting period, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, hawl, 1 whole year. Originally it was 1 whole year that a woman whose husband had died, she was required to remain indoors and grieve and mourn at the loss of her husband for 1 whole year, 1 complete year. And that's also within the Quran, that ayah is within the Quran. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easier for the woman by reducing that time to 4 months and 10 days. The consequence of that, so that's the ayah. وَالَّذِينَ يَتَوَفَّوْنَ مِنْكُمْ وَيَذَرُونَ أَزْوَاجٍ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةَ أَشْهُرٍ وَعَشْرًا. If any of you die and leave behind widows, the widow should wait for 4 months and 10 days. What does that involve? A woman whose husband has died, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires her to go into a state of mourning and grieving for the loss of her husband. At the time she should go into a state of mourning and grieving at the loss of her husband. During that time, there are 2 main things that are haram for her. There are 2 main things that are haram for her to do. The first, as stated in the ayah, she is not to leave her home except in times of extreme need. It is forbidden for a woman who's in her iddah, in her waiting period, and here we're looking more so the issue of a widow, although this also applies to talaq, but that's not our discussion. This also applies to iddah from talaq. A woman who's divorced, the same rule applies, but this is not the discussion here. A woman whose husband has died, she is not allowed to leave her home for a period of 4 months and 10 days. And that's stated in the ayah, the beginning of Surah Al-Talaq, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لا تخرجوهن من بيوتهن ولا يخرجن إلا أن يأتين بفاحشة مبينة. So sarih in the Quran, it's clear in the Quran, do not make them leave their homes, nor should they leave. Do not make them leave their homes, nor should they leave. Unless there's extreme need. What's not extreme need? And this is mentioned because, one, it's raised, and second, there are women who do this. We discussed it in the past session. It is prohibited for a woman to attend the burial of, well, generally it's prohibited for women to attend burials, generally. But the widow is not allowed to leave her home to go and visit the graveyard until her iddah is over. Until her iddah is over. Even though she may want to go and visit the graveyard, that's not a valid reason for her to leave the home. It's not a valid reason for her to leave the home, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has categorically stated, وَلَا يَخْرُجْنَ. They do not leave their homes. So to go and visit the grave of their husband who's just died, they cannot do that for that period of 4 months and 10 days. After that, once their iddah is over, that's a different matter. But during the iddah, they cannot do that. The second, which also happens, people ask, and it also happens, is if the body is returned back home, she cannot leave to go with that body. Or return back home, back to a different country. The body sent, she cannot go with that body because she's forbidden from leaving her home during that time. The third, which we're going to come on to, the issue of receiving condolences. If people come to her home to give her condolences, that's fine, but for her to go to a centre or somewhere else because of the need for space to receive larger numbers, she's not allowed to leave her home. The ayah is categorical, وَلَا يَخْرُجْنَ. And she does not leave her home. So the only time she may do so is in extreme need. That's the first prohibition of a woman in her iddah, and this is because she's in a state of grieving and mourning for the loss of her husband. The second prohibition, what's known in Arabic as al-ihdad. Al-ihdad or al-hidad. She's not to adorn herself. She's to wear the simplest of clothes. And this is while she's at home. She's not leaving the home. While she's at home, she's not to wear any perfume, any scent, any makeup, even the type of clothes that she wears. She wears the simplest of clothes. Nothing that's attractive or has colour on it and so on. She wears the simplest of clothes because she's in a state of mourning and grief at the loss of her husband. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, it is not lawful for a woman who believes in Allah on the last day to leave beautifying herself for a deceased person for 3 or more days other than her husband for 4 months and 10 days. If a woman has lost a family member, like her father, her brother, any other family member, and she wants to grieve at the loss of her family member, the Prophet ﷺ says she's only allowed to do that where she goes into a state of mourning, where she wears dark clothes, for example, only like black clothes, only for 3 days. Except for her husband, where she has to be in that state for 4 months and 10 days. Anybody else, a maximum 3 days, the Prophet ﷺ, he said. Maximum 3 days. That's her father, her brother, any other family member who dies. But her husband, the Prophet ﷺ required that she be in a state of mourning for 4 months and 10 days. So that includes the clothes that she wears. That includes using perfume, that includes using scent. Anything that she would normally do just to make herself look attractive at home, around women, around the husband. She's not allowed to do any of that for a period of 4 months and 10 days. So there are 2 prohibitions that apply. For a woman who's in iddah, from the death of her husband, a widow, she's not to leave the home for 4 months and 10 days. She's not to adorn herself while she's at home for that same period of time. That's the first issue, that's the iddah. We're just going to run through these issues because there's quite a lot that we need to cover. And anybody has any questions on these, although we're going to go through quite a few different issues, if you just make a note of them and leave them till the end. The second, what's known as ta'ziyah, condolences, offering condolences to the family of the deceased. The first thing about offering condolences, it's a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ to do that. And the Prophet ﷺ gave great encouragement of reward in doing that. When you know that somebody has a family member who's died, it's a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that you offer them condolences. What does it mean to offer condolences? It's not what we do, where everybody gathers around, Fatiha, Yasin, and then you start talking about everything, not really caring. That's not what the sunnah is. It's you go there, you go to that person, and you remind them to be patient in their time of difficulty and at their loss. You remind them to be patient, because that person is suffering at that point. He's in a state of grief. He's in a state of pain. So you need them to be in a state of sabr, to be in a state of patience at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put them through at that point. And that's why the first hadith, the Prophet said, "Man azza musaban falahu mithlu ajri." Whoever offers condolences to an afflicted person has the likes of his reward. All the suffering that that person goes through, and the pain, with all of that sabr he had, with all that patience, and he has great reward. إِنَّمَا يُوَفَّى الصَّابِرُونَ أَجْرَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He gives the reward of those who are patient without any limits. Unlimited, those who are patient. If you go to that person and you just say to him, just be patient at the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just be patient. You make some of the statements that we're going to show that the Prophet told. If you just remind them to be patient at their loss, then you receive the same reward for all the suffering that they go through. An additional point to add here. In the wording here, the Prophet said musaban, a person afflicted. He didn't restrict it just to somebody who's lost a family member. Any suffering that anybody goes through, any type of suffering, it doesn't have to be loss of life. It could be anything. But you just go to him and remind, just be patient at the qada of Allah subhanahu. Just be patient with Allah subhanahu's decree. Then you have the same reward as that person in that time of difficulty. Another hadith, Man azza thakla kusiya burdaini fil jannah. The Prophet says, whoever gives condolences to a widow will be clothed with the shawls of paradise. Whoever gives condolences to a widow. Well, here we should note, here we have to stay within the boundaries of the rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who gives condolences to the widow? It's females, unless it's an elderly woman where there's no harm in males giving condolences, and family members only. Ajanib, unrelated males, should not go up to females and start giving them condolences. We have to remain within the boundaries of the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But here particularly a widow, the Prophet spoke about widow. She's lost her husband. Females going and giving her condolences, reminding her to be patient at her loss. The Prophet said is clothed with two shawls. It says shawls, but it's burdain, two shawls of paradise. Because her affliction is great. Like losing the husband, the one who takes care of her affliction is great. So when you hear that a woman has lost her husband and you give her that condolence and that reassurance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give her better if she's patient, that person gets a guarantee of being clothed with the clothes of paradise. Third hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, there is no believer who gives condolences to his brother during his suffering except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clothes him with garments of honor on the day of judgment. There is no believer who gives condolences to his brother during his suffering except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clothes him with garments of honor on the day of judgment. What does it mean to give condolences? What does the phrase in Arabic is ta'ziyah. Ta'ziyah. What exactly does that mean? It means to remind the family to be patient at the loss. That's all it is. That's ta'ziyah. You just remind them to be patient with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decided for them. Just remind them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them that person in their life, and that life is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's, and if He takes it any time, that's His business. That's His business. Whether it's a child that you lose at the age of 1 or it's your father you lose at the age of 70. It's the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If He decides that you can have a child for 1 year or you can have somebody for 70 years, it's the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills for that person. And that's what the Prophet reminded his daughter who lost her child. He sent a message to her saying, Inna lillahi ma akhadha, wa lahu ma a'ta, wa kullu shay'in 'indahu bi ajalin musamma. The Prophet sent a message to her on the loss of her child saying, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took belonged to Him. Inna lillahi ma akhadha, wa lahu ma a'ta. And what He gave in the first place was His. And everything has its set time. And so, your responsibility when you go to give condolences, ta'ziyah, just remind them to be patient with, to to be patient with the qada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to do that is recommended and encouraged, and as long as you do that, we have the reminder, the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's a general hadith, but it has an application here, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam he said, "Wallahu fi awn al-abdi ma kana al-abdu fi awn akhi." Allah is in the assistance of the slave as long as he's in the assistance of his brother. If you want Allah subhanahu to help you, you help other people. If you want Allah subhanahu to help you, you help other people. If you want to have ease through times of your difficulty, you give ease to other people in times of their difficulty. And then Allah subhanahu will make your difficulty easy for you. That person suffering, just remind them, console them, and recognize that they're going through that grief, that they're going through that pain, but help them through that. And it's inevitable, everybody has to go through times of difficulty. You can't escape it, you're a human being. You can't escape it. But when your time of difficulty comes, Allah subhanahu will give you help through that time of difficulty. Wallahu fi awn al-abd ma kana al-abdu fi awn akhi. Allah is in the assistance of the slave as long as the slave is in the assistance of his brother. Some of the etiquettes, and here we have a problem. And these are cultural problems which we should try and move away from. Certain adab of ta'ziyah, certain etiquettes which are good to practice when you're giving condolences. Remember, giving condolences about helping that the family, the deceased, to go through that pain that they're suffering. It's not about adding pain onto their pain. And often that's what we do. Often what we're doing is we don't help people to come through their pain. The first ta'ziyah can be given before or after the burial. Preferable, the earlier the better. The earlier the better. As soon as you hear that person has lost somebody, straight away go and offer condolences to that person, rather than delaying it, because people often go a week later, 2 weeks later, just because it doesn't fit into their busy schedule. They'll come weeks later. The earlier the better, because that's the time when they feel the pain. That's the time when they feel the most pain. It is makruh. It is makruh. It is disliked to offer condolences after 3 days of the death. And that's such a common thing that we do. It's such a common thing. A week later, 2 weeks later, you go there knocking on the door, offering condolences, just because you couldn't go earlier. You go and you delay the whole process. What you're trying to do is help them move along. You come 2 weeks later, you just remind them of their pain. And so ideally, what you should try and do is offer condolences and go and see the family, the deceased, within 3 days of when that person died. Try not to delay it. Try not to delay it more than that. It is only acceptable after 3 days if either the person giving condolences or the family member receiving condolences is away within those 3 days, where you couldn't come, where you genuinely could not come and see the family. Within the 3 days, then there's no harm in delaying that. But if you're there and you could have gone, for you now to start delaying it becomes makruh. So try not to delay the process of giving condolences. The other problem that we have, giving condolences is meant to ease the pain of the family, and delaying beyond 3 days does not help in overcoming their grief. The other problem that we have, which is common, is said it is makruh to give condolences in 2 places, and we do it. One is inside the mosque. Inside the mosque. And what happens now? All of them sit in the mosque and they receive condolences. If it's in the musalla, if it's in the mosque area, that's not meant for a place of condolences. It's not, even to the extent we mentioned before, even to pray janazah prayer inside the masjid is makruh. If you're not meant to pray janazah prayer, then how are you receiving condolences inside the masjid? The masjid was not built for that purpose. That's why you don't have the body inside there. That's the very reason. It's not meant for that purpose. But that's common now. That inside, if it's in the surrounding area or rooms around that are not masjid, or in the basement area in the masjid, that's acceptable, because that's not part of the mosque. But the mosque area itself, especially the hall, that's where people are meant to be praying, reading Quran, doing dhikr Allah. That's the purpose of the masjid. So even though that's become common, that's not the best. That's not the best. Even though you may have to receive large numbers of people, the ideal is if you're going to then perhaps do in a centre or somewhere else where you can receive large numbers, but the mosque is not meant to be a place where you receive people. And the second where it's also common is at the janazah itself, the burial, the defen. Because what will happen there, the defen takes place and everybody starts going over to the family member and starts giving condolences. That's not the place of giving condolences. That's not the time, that's not the place of giving condolences. So try and avoid giving condolences at these 2 times, in the mosque or at the funeral itself. One of the better things when you are offering condolences is to read this dua. when you're offering condolences, to read this dua, where you say, أعظم الله أجرك وأحسن عزاءك وغفر لميتك. Learn this dua, write it down, learn this dua, and whenever somebody dies, just say that to them. Say that to them. May Allah increase your reward. May He make good your loss, and may He forgive that person who's dying. May Allah increase your reward through the difficulties that you go through. May He make good your loss. أحسن عزاءك وغفر لميتك. And may He forgive your deceased. There are other statements that the Prophet used, and it can be anything that you say. The key thing, just make a dua for that person, make a dua for the person who's dying. And just remind them to be patient through their difficulty. In addition, if the person who's died, if a person who's died is not a Muslim, if he's not a Muslim, we have a different issue there, because you can't pray for the deceased of non-Muslims. You can't pray for the dead of non-Muslims, but you can still give them ta'ziyah. If it's like a work colleague or somebody that you know who's not Muslim, you can offer them condolences. There's no harm in that, but you can't pray for the deceased, for the dead of a non-Muslim. And so there you change the wording. You say, أعظم الله أجرك وأحسن عزاك. May Allah increase your reward, but the reward of a non-Muslim is in this world, not in the next world. And Allah gives the non-Muslim, He gives them in this world, gives them wealth, He gives them a lot of things in this world. But the next world is nothing. There's nothing. And make good your loss. And that's it. And that's it. To forgive your deceased, if you're non-Muslim, you cannot pray. You cannot pray for forgiveness of the deceased of a non-Muslim. So learn that dua. The whole of that dua is for a Muslim. أعظم الله أجرك وأحسن عزاءك وغفر لميتك. May Allah increase your reward. May He make good your loss and forgive your deceased. And if the one that you give condolence to, the deceased is not Muslim, then you drop the last part. أعظم الله أجرك وأحسن عزاءك. The third issue we look at, loss of a child. Loss of a child, and this is perhaps the most painful. But in all of this, the Prophet He gave us a lot of comfort within this. He gave us a lot of comfort, and He gave us He gave His ways to help through this, because especially the mother, she'll suffer so much. She'll suffer so much through the loss of her child. The father, he'll suffer, but not to the same degree. But the mother, she carried that child for that period of time. And that's whether it's a miscarriage or it's a child who's born or who passed away in their infancy at a very young age. Like, the mother's going to feel the pain the most. What we see within the Prophet ﷺ is that anything that we suffer, he suffered more than us. So whenever you have a loss, you as a father and a mother, you lose your child. Just remember the Prophet ﷺ lost Sayyidina Qasim, and he lost Sayyidina Abdullah. He had two sons who died in their infancy, and he lost Sayyidina Ibrahim. And the third son from Sayyidina Mari al-Qubtiyya, he lost three of his sons in their infancy, to the point where the unbelievers, the kuffar, they started insulting him because of this. They started calling him al-Abtar, the one who can't have children or sons. But Allah explained the reason why. It's ما كان محمد أبا أحد من رجالكم ولكن رسول الله وخاتم النبيين. Why is it that he doesn't have any sons who grow to be adults? Because if they grow to be adults, they will be prophets, but he's Khatam al-Nabiyyin. He sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he's the seal of the prophets. He can't have any sons who will grow, because the sons of prophets usually are prophets. The sons of prophets usually are prophets. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala closed the line of prophecy by ensuring the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam didn't have males. But his line was still preserved through his female Sayyidah Fatima. The line didn't die off. The line did not die off, and that's min khasa'is an-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That's from the uniqueness of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Everybody else's nasab, your lineage is preserved through your son. And if you have no son, your nasab ends at that point. Except for the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Except for the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his line continued through his female as Sayyidah Fatima. So the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam experienced, anybody who loses a child, just go back and read how the Prophet ﷺ was. How the Prophet ﷺ was. And you have detail, especially you have most detail about how he dealt with the loss of his son Ibrahim. Sayyidina Ibrahim, how he dealt with the loss of his son Ibrahim. We have most detail about that. But then, if you lose a child, the first thing to remember that your child is a guarantee of paradise for you. Miftah al-Jannah. That child that you lost, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took that child away from you in order to give you paradise. But it requires you to be sabr, it requires you to be patient. And patience, as the Prophet, he told the Sahabiya who was crying at the grave at the loss of a child, and the Prophet came to her and said, be patient. She didn't know it was the Prophet, and she said, you don't know the suffering that I'm going through. The Prophet left her, and then when she was told, she followed the Prophet and said that I'm patient. The Prophet said, As-sabru inda sadmat al-ula. Patience is at the first blow. It's at that moment. The first time you're hit by that difficulty, you say, Alhamdulillah, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. If you say that, then that loss of that child is a key to paradise for you. That's a guarantee of Jannah for you. And that's confirmed by the statement of the Prophet where he said, there are no two Muslims for whom 3 children die. You lose 3 children, and the Prophet lost 3 sons. The Prophet himself, he lost 3 sons. Except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enter them into paradise through the grace of His mercy towards them. They, the Sahaba, they want the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be even broader than that. So the Sahaba says to the Prophet, or 2 children. And he said, or 2. Any Muslim who loses 2 children, those children, Allah will enter them into paradise. The Sahaba didn't stop at that point. Or 1. Or 1? He said, or 1. Even if you lose 1 child, that child, Allah will enter you into paradise because of your loss of that child. In another narration, the Prophet he spoke about your children that you lose as your farat. Your farat is the one that you send ahead of you, waiting for you to come. And the Sahaba, I think Sayyidah Aisha, she mentioned, what about the one who has no child, who loses no child? The Prophet said, Ana faratukum. I am the one who will be waiting for you. So even though you may have not lost any children, the Prophet said, I'll be waiting for you there. I will take care of you. I will take care of you on that day. And then coming back that you lose 3 children, 2 children, or 1 child, and you're going through the difficulty and the pain, just remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took that child away from you so that you have Jannah. So you have Jannah. And the Prophet then said, by the one in whose hand is my soul, the fetus will pull its mother by its umbilical cord to paradise on one condition, إِذَا احْتَسَبَتْهُ. As long as she, at the point where she lost that child, she was in a state of patience, seeking reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As long as she's in a state of patience when she loses that child, and she's content with what Allah has decided for her, that child will pull her into paradise through the very umbilical cord that connected the child to the mother. Another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, the miscarried fetus will stand angrily at the door of paradise. That unborn child will be told enter into paradise, because children go into paradise. Those who die as children, they enter into paradise. So that unborn child is being told to enter into paradise. But that unborn child stands at the door of paradise and said, I'm not going to enter until my parents enter into paradise. I will not enter into paradise until my parents enter into paradise. If you are patient at the moment of your loss, and the loss here could be a miscarriage, it could be an infant child. It could be the child is born, it could be a child died at the age of 1, 2, 3, whatever age, up to the age of puberty. If you are patient, and patience here means, as we said, at the moment that you hear that you lose your child, you say, Alhamdulillah, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. That's patience at that point. You praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the time where you suffer the most. And you say, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. That we're from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're returning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's all His. It's all His. We're going to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the child's going to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whether that child goes as a child or as an adult, it's all Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you go into that state of complete rida, complete happiness and contentment with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for you. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has built for those parents a house in paradise that's called Bayt al-Hamd, the house of praise. And that's stated in this hadith But the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, when the son of a slave dies, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to his angels, you took the child of my slave. They say yes. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is only questioning the angels to show us the reward. To show us the reward of the one who's patient, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. And the angels know. So why is this conversation taking place? To let us know that this is the reward that comes for those who are patient when they lose their child. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the angels, you took the child of my slave? They say yes. He says, you took the fruit of his heart? They say yes. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the angels, what did my slave say? The angels say, Hamidaka wa starja'ak. He praised you, and very loose translation, starja'a just means to say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So what did he do? He said, Alhamdulillah, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So whoever Allah afflicts you with that musibah, with that misfortune of losing your child, Alhamdulillah, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He said that, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, build for my slave a house in paradise and call it the house of praise. Build for my slave a house in paradise and call it the house of praise. So that's the loss of a child. That's the encouragement that the Prophet ﷺ, that's the reason why he takes your child away from you. For you to go into a state of patience and submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so He gives you a guarantee in the next world. He's giving you a guarantee in the next world that you have a guarantee of paradise, and you have a guarantee that you'll see your child in the next world. There's nothing for you to worry about, however naturally it's difficult for you to take, and however emotionally difficult it is for the person. The next issue, the fourth issue, food. The issue of food. We have a problem and we need to reintroduce the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. When somebody dies, we've already mentioned the grief that the pain, the suffering that they're going through. The normal thing that happens when somebody dies, in his mind, all these people come to give condolences. I need food. I need to get food prepared. It should be the other way around. The sunnah is the other way around. Somebody who's lost the people around them, extended family, neighbours and so on, you should make sure that that family do not need to worry about food for a number of days. Meaning what? Nobody in the household needs to cook. They're going through a lot of pain. They're going through a lot of suffering. They're going through a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And the Prophet ﷺ told us, or he told some the family, people around, the Sahaba, اصنعوا لآل جعفر طعاما فقد جاءهم ما يشغلهم. Prepare food for the family of Ja'far. Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, when he was martyred at the Ghazwa of Mu'tah, the Battle of Mu'tah, he told family members, make sure that food is prepared for the family of Sayyidina Ja'far, because there has come to them that which has occupied them, which is the grief and the pain of the loss of Sayyidina Ja'far. So when somebody dies, the family shouldn't be thinking about food for a number of days. Like, people around them should be ensuring, cook food for them, send food to them. Cook food for them and send food to them for a number of days, just to allow them to deal with the grief that they're going through and all the issues that they need to deal with. So that's why we say it is sunnah for the neighbours and distant relatives to provide food for the family on the day of the death, especially the very day itself. It is sunnah the Prophet ﷺ to do that. Ensure that that family is taken care of, that on the day that that person died or a few days around that, they don't need to worry about food. The extended family, neighbours and so on, they're the ones who should take care of them. In addition, for people to come and expect food to be served to them, that's makruh to do that. It's makruh to do that, even though it's common. If it's people travelling from afar and other people not directly from of the family that the deceased taking care of, that's one thing. But you should not have the situation where large numbers are coming to visit them and food is being served to them on the basis that that person's died. That's makruh. To serve them is makruh. If you come to give condolences, don't hang around for a long period of time. Don't wait for a long period of time. Just come, give condolences, remain there for a short while. Don't expect to be served food. If you need to eat, then go and find food elsewhere. That food that's served at that point is makruh. You should be ensuring that they're taken care of, not that you're taken care of. When you go to see them, particularly if you're close, bring food to them. Ensure that they're taken care of. And one last point about food. It is good for the family of the deceased to provide food for the poor as isal al-thawab at the time of death. It's a send reward because bil ittifaq, and we're going to come on to this issue about sending a reward for the deceased. We're going to come on to this issue, that's next. But by agreements, to give charity on behalf of the deceased is sunnah, by agreement. That's clear in hadith. There's no dispute about that. So at the point of death, because there are those who claim that isal al-thawab has no basis, but nobody disputes about sadaqah and hajj, because that's clear in hadith. Nobody disputes about charity and hajj, because that's clear. So have food cooked on behalf of the deceased and give it to the fuqara, and give it to the poor with the niyyah that the reward of all of that's going to that person who's died. As his soul has gone into the barzakh, the very first moment, he's receiving reward from you. He's receiving reward from the very first moment. So that's the issue of preparing food. So ensure when somebody dies that those around, they take care of their family. And don't expect when you go to the family to give condolences that you're fed. And if you have a family member who's just died, prepare food and give it to the poor and send the reward on to that person who just died. The last issue around bereavements. One of the best way you can ever help. Somebody who's died is to send rewards for them. Your tears, which are tears. I mean, here we're talking about family themselves. You cry, you suffer pain, and so on. That's all natural. That's all normal. And that'll be there for a period of time. But once you have lost somebody in your family, the best thing you can ever do for them is to do acts of worship on their behalf. The best thing you can ever do for them. Yes, you have that natural process of grief that you need to go through, but your grieving does not help the deceased. That's for you, that's yourself. Once you've overcome the most difficult periods of grieving, then start thinking about how can I benefit that person who's died? We have this hadith. When a person dies, his deeds stop except from three. He himself, when you die and you go into the barzakh, you go into your grave, there's nothing more you can do because the grave is not the place where you can do a'mal, you can do reward, actions that you get reward for. This is the place where you do deeds for reward. It's this world. This is dar al-bala, that's dar al-jaza. This is the world where you're being tested. The grave and the next world, that's the world where you get repaid for whatever you've done. So in the grave, you don't pray as an act of worship. If you're allowed to pray like prophets who pray in the graves, it's as a reward. You pray as a reward, not as an act of worship, but as a reward for enjoying prayer in this world. So your actions, your actions, they come to an end once you leave this world. Except for three. The Prophet said, except for three, sadaqah jariyah, a continuous charity. And we're going to come on to this when we look at the issue of inheritance. That the Prophet he gave you, he said that Allah subhanahu has given you at the end of your life 1/3 of your wealth as a charitable act. And we're going to come on to this. This is called wasiyah, where you can leave a bequest of 1/3 of your wealth for any charitable cause. Why? Because as you're about to leave this world, you're thinking, I need to leave something behind where I keep on getting rewarded. Allah allowed you 1/3 of your wealth, you can give it to any charitable cause. So continuous charity. Continuous charity means something that people keep on using, so years and years later, the reward carries on coming. Like a masjid, like a well for the poor. Like these things that people can keep on using, that years later you can benefit from. The second, ilmun yuntafa'u bih. Knowledge that people take benefit from. Like something that you write, something that you teach. The best thing, teach your children. Leave something behind that people can benefit from. Like a madrasa that people benefit from. Books of knowledge that people benefit from. Classes of knowledge that people keep on benefiting from. Remember everything that we learn. Where's it going back to? To He sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And all of the imams that have been our imams of guidance, they all receiving the grave without reducing your reward in any way whatsoever. Why? Because they left this knowledge behind by which benefit is taken from. And the third, وَلَدٌ صَالِحٌ يَدْعُونَ. You leave behind a child male child, female child, who's righteous, who makes dua for you. Who makes dua for you. That's something, your walad, your child is part of your amal. It's part of your amal. Because the Prophet ﷺ said the person dies, his actions stop except from three. How's your child, your action? That you put all of that effort in to raise that child. And now that child, when you leave this world, that child is a righteous believer who prays for you. That's your amal. That's your actions that will keep on, you'll keep on receiving reward for. Also remember the other way around. When your father or your mother dies, every single prayer, after every single prayer, make dua for them. Make dua for them. It's the best thing you can ever do for your parents. And this is recorded from Abu Hanif, Imam al-A'zam Abu Hanif rahimahullah. He said that after every prayer, I always make dua for my teacher Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman and for my parents. After every prayer, I made dua for my teacher and for my parents. So so those are your own deeds. That's your own actions. All of them stop except for those three that I mentioned. But now the other issue. Now that's about you yourself. Now the point about what can you do for somebody who's died? What can you do for somebody who's died? There's two issues here. We're going to separate them out to understand. There's fard acts, performance of fard acts that person was meant to do himself, which he didn't do. And then there's sending reward of any actions. The two separate issues here. So the first question that we're going to look at, can you do fard actions for the person who's died? He didn't do them. Like for example, prayers that your father didn't pray, your mother didn't pray, and they didn't do qada of it. Can you do those prayers for them? Can you do fast for them? And so can you do hajj for them? Can you pay zakah for them? And so on. Can you do fard acts? The fuqaha, they divide up into three types of actions. They said physical actions that involve movements of the body, like prayer and fasting. They said you cannot do qada of them for them when they passed away. And we'll come back to the issue of prayer and fasting, what can be done for the deceased. But if your father and mother has qada of prayers, you can't do the qada yourself and say this prayer is for them. You can't do that. Fasting is the other one as well, because there's hadith in al-Bukhari which states that you can, but the fuqaha all as a whole, or majority, definitely the Hanafi and the Shafi'i, they say no, you can't. Even though the Prophet ﷺ said it, and they said it's what's termed in usul is mansukh. It was originally the case, but then it was cancelled. But the rule of fasting, if somebody's died and they still got fard fast or Ramadan to do, you can't do those fasts for that person. So fard actions you can't do. Financial acts, what's known as a'mal maliyah. The main example is zakat. Your father had zakat for years that he didn't pay. Fatrana for years, zakat al-fitr, he didn't pay. You can pay it on his behalf. Like zakat, financial acts, yes. Physical acts, no. The third, physical has a part physical, part financial, primarily hajj. Can you do hajj? Because hajj involves physical movements, but also the shart, the condition is that you own wealth. So it has both. The ulama, they said, if your father or your mother has a hajj outstanding, it is valid for you to do for them if they were not able to do it. If they were not able to do it. Otherwise, no. Otherwise, no. If they were not able to do it, then you could do it. Otherwise, you can't perform it for them. So we have three different cases in terms of fard actions to do for someone who's died who didn't do it. Physical ones, prayer and fasting, no, you can't do that. Financial, like zakat, yes, you can. Hajj, only if they were not able to do it, then you can perform it for them. So that's about doing qada of actions that they've not done. Now the issue of sending reward. Sending reward. What's known as isal al-thawab. The rule, the general rule, any action that you do, fard, nafil, whether it's prayer, fasting, hajj, sadaqah, Quran or dhikr, anything that you do, you can send a reward to a living person or a dead person. It doesn't even need to be somebody who's passed away. You can read Quran, your father's still alive, send it to him. His soul receives that. His soul receives it. It doesn't even need. And here the other important point, two important points here. One, it can be anything, any action that you do. It's not just Quran. Isal al-thawab is not just about Quran. It can be any action that you do. And in addition, by you doing that, it doesn't remove the reward from you doing the action. You receive the the reward of your action, and on top of that you send the reward onto somebody else. You're receiving the reward, you send the reward onto somebody else, it does not affect your reward. Allah does not reduce your reward because you send it on to somebody else. The second point, it can be for any action that you do. It's not restricted to any action. You just pray the fard of Maghrib or Isha. Every time you finish, you say, Allah send the reward onto the soul of this person. And it doesn't affect your reward. You don't need to just do it for khatams of Quran. Although it's good to do that, anytime you do any action, send the reward on. Send the reward on. And the third point, the person doesn't have to have died. You can send the reward onto somebody who's alive. The best, some of the ulama they mention, the best, and sadaqah here is just an example. The best when giving sadaqah is to make your need for every single Muslim. Every single Muslim, which also tells you when you give, send the reward onto somebody who's passed away, or when you're sending on the reward, it doesn't need to be to one person. It doesn't need to be one person. Don't restrict the karam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't restrict the generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you think that I've done this and I can only send the reward of this Quran to my family, send it to anybody you want. Send it to anybody you want. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Kareem. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is generous. He will give the reward to everybody that you ask for. All believing men, all believing women, because it reaches them without the reward being reduced from you in any way whatsoever. And they also mention, send the reward to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He doesn't need the reward, but you need to send it on to him. Because, as some of our shaykh they mention, when you do Isal al-Thawab, when you send the reward on, what are you doing? You're building a connection into the barzakh for yourself. The one who receives the angels, they send it on platters of gold and silver, and they send it to that person and said, it's from such and such a person. So every time you send the reward onto the Prophet, he's aware that it came from you. He knows you. There's no connection. So that when you go into the barzakh, when you die, who meets you? Whose soul meets you? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the fa'id and the nafa' comes back to you. Why do you send it to him sometimes when he has no need of anything from you? Because you have need of him. Because you have need of him. So you keep on sending, increase the connections. Like as one of our shaykh mentioned, you send a correspondence or you send gifts to somebody who lives in a far away land you've never met, and just a correspondence that you keep on sending gifts. So when you finally go and travel to that person's country, he comes out to meet you and he makes every arrangement for you. That's why you send the thawab to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when you finally do reach that destination, the barzakh, he sometimes makes all the preparation for you and he comes to receive you. So Isal al-Thawab is one of the ways that you help yourself to overcome the difficulty and the grief, the loss that you have. Just maintain that connection. And although this is not directly the point, but be aware that your family members who have died, they are aware of your state in this world. They are aware of you, particularly your parents and your relatives. And that's indicated in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَقَلِ اعْمَلُوا فَسَيَرَ اللَّهُ عَمَلَكُمْ وَرَسُولُهُ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Say to them, do their actions, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees your actions, and so does the Prophet and so do the believers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees your actions at all times. The Prophet in the barzakh, he's shown your actions. He knows what you do. It's presented to him. And all the mu'minun. Ibn Kathir in his tafsir, he relates a hadith which states that the Prophet mentioned that when a person dies, or when your father or your mother or your relatives dies, your actions are shown to them. They're presented to them. They're presented to them and they're made aware. So be aware that your family who's in the barzakh, they are aware of your states. And they're aware when you send them deeds, then they're made aware by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have that connection with them. You don't lose connection from them. You have that connection. So although you have a loss, the loss is in a physical sense. There should always be that connection, particularly a connection of souls. Wallahu a'lam. They're the 5 main points around bereavements that we want to introduce. We're going to now go on to the second part, and I'm trying to rush through this because we have a fair amount to cover. So now we're going to go on to the issue of wills and inheritance. But before we do that, let's open up any questions on what we cover, because this is almost like in 2 parts. So are there any questions on what we've covered so far before we move on to this last section? I want to open up now for any questions, if anybody has any questions. Bismillah.
Shaykh, with the months, the 4 months and the 10 days, is that lunar months or?
Lunar months, yeah. It's lunar months, and they said if the husband dies on the first of the month, then it's exactly 4 months and 10 days. If it's anywhere after the first of the month, then it's 130 days. The point being because in a lunar month you have 29 or 30 days. So if it's on the first of the month, you don't look at how many days the month has, whether it's 29 or 30. She does an exact 4 months and 10 days. But if it's any point after the first of the month, and you don't look at 29 or 30 days, it's exactly 130 days.
In the iddah of talaq, whereby the woman is expecting a child, her iddah terminates at the birth of the child,
That's right.
whether it exceeds 4 months
That's
or
right.
10 days or not.
Yeah.
Is that the case?
Yeah, that's right.
Same case for if she loses her husband.
If she's pregnant, whatever iddah she's on, whether it's an iddah of talaq or as a widow, if she's pregnant, then the iddah of pregnancy overrides. So if, for example, she's been divorced and she was pregnant, she'd normally be 3 menstruations, but she's not going to menstruate while she's pregnant. So it'll be, whether it's a week later or 9 months later, that's the length of her iddah. And the same if if her husband's died and she's pregnant, it will be the length of the pregnancy, not 4 months and 10 days. Again here, because it could be that husband dies and a week later she gives birth. It could be husband dies and 9 months later she gives birth. It's on the pregnancy. It's not on the 4 months, 10 days. Allah. Any other questions? You got a mic there? No questions? It's fine if there isn't. We can move on. Yeah, especially the sisters. If you want to write the question, you're welcome to do that. Yeah.
Shaykh, you know.
Well, give them the mic. Yeah. So we don't need to repeat it for the back.
Shaykh, when it comes to condolences in the masjid, how do we change such a common practice?
One thing you realise as we read through these sessions is that there's a lot of practices that need changing. But it's not about imposing them upon people, it's just about going away from these and just discussing these things. Going back. And whenever you come to any type of sessions like these, you should return back home and just start discussing matters that you picked up within the household, so people become aware of these matters. The problem with all of these things is that people aren't even told that there's an issue with them. So it's not about like forcing change upon people, it's just about educating people, just making them aware of issues like this. And slowly but surely change can happen. Any other question? If not, we'll move on to the discussion around wills and inheritance. The issues of wills and inheritance, we're going to try and simplify this because it's not always simple. This is the last of your obligations, or one of the key final obligations in terms of the deceased, the person who's died, is what happens to the wealth of that person who's died. What happens to the wealth of that person who's died. I want to read a hadith here, and it's going to come further, but let me jump ahead. The Prophet ﷺ said, learn inheritance, ilm al-fara'id. In Arabic it's known as al-fara'id or al-mirath. Learn inheritance because it is from your religion. It is half of knowledge, and it is the first knowledge lifted from my ummah. Learn inheritance because it is from your religion. It is half of knowledge, and it is the first knowledge lifted from my nation. So what we're going to discuss, even though it's going to be a very simplified discussion around it, and especially when we give examples of it, it may get a bit complicated. I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible. But it's something that people should want to start to learn because of the statement of the Prophet. This is an amr, this is an order of the Prophet. He said, ta'allamul fara'id. That's an amr, that's an order from the Prophet. Learn rules of inheritance because it's a part of your religion. It's half of knowledge, it's the first knowledge that's going to be lifted from this ummah. So make it a concern upon yourself. The wealth of a person when he dies, which often becomes a source of dispute, it often becomes a problem. Like, the truth is, even when people are alive, wealth is a major problem. That's what causes divisions in families. That's what causes families to break up, because of land and money and so on. People fight over it whilst they're alive, and definitely they fight over it when they're dead, when the person's gone. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you the clearest instructions in the Quran about it. And the problem here, like when you look at the whole of ahkam, ayat al-ahkam in the Quran, all the rules in the Quran, the verses that speak about rules, the most clearest described rules are the rules on inheritance. It is to the point where there's very little difference amongst the imams of the madhahib. It's all the same, because Allah has spelled it out in the clearest detail so that you and I don't argue about these things. In all issues around prayer and marriage and fasting and so on, you have ikhtilaf al-madhahib. You have differences across madhabs. You have virtually no difference over the issues around inheritance. Because Allah He's eliminated the differences so you and I don't argue about it when people die. So we have guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about these matters. What happens when a person dies in terms of his wealth? Let's go back. First hadith to look about. Advice of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is not lawful for a man who believes in Allah on the last day, who has wealth that can be left as a bequest, to sleep 2 nights without his will under his head. It's not lawful for a person who believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the last day, who has wealth that can be left behind as a bequest, that you go to sleep for 2 consecutive days without writing a will, that you leave under your head. And Imam al-Ghazali, he takes that literally. He says it is sunnah that when you go to sleep, you keep your will underneath your pillow. Because the Prophet said without his will under his head. Why? As a reminder, because when you sleep, you go into a state of semi-death, type of death. And Nawm akhul maut. Sleep is the brother of death. And when you wake up, you say, Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyana ba'da ma amatana. You thank Allah for giving you life after you've died. So the Prophet said, put your will under your head at the moment that you go to sleep, just to remind you that death is imminent. It's always there. When the Prophet ﷺ, he said this, the ulama said it is recommended. It's not that you're a sinner. It's not that you're a sinner if you don't have a will, but it's recommended that you record a will in which what we're going to discuss, the key issues are what we're going to discuss, are written within that will. It's recommended that you have a written will. That's what the Prophet is telling you here, a written will. Discussing on that will the points that we're going to look at in terms of the wealth that you have and other issues that you have. So remember that it's a recommended practice that you have a written will that you always keep with you as a reminder that all of this wealth that you have, there's nothing permanent about it. That is tomorrow or in 50 years' time, it's going to be distributed amongst those that you leave behind, the family that you leave behind. So that's the importance of keeping wills, and that's why we need to discuss what we're about to discuss. The next point. So just as ensuring that you do the burial of that person, all what we discussed in the 4 sessions before, how to wash the dead body, if it's your father, you need to know how to wash him, how to shroud him, how to pray janazah prayer properly, how to bury him, how to go to the janazah, how to do everything right. You must also know how to distribute the wealth of that person correctly. And it's a fard upon you to know that. It's a fard kifaya, it's a collective responsibility. There should always be people who know, but you should take a particular interest in knowing to avoid inevitable problems and a lot of the dhulm that takes place. There's a lot of dhulm, there's a lot of injustice that takes place when a person dies with the wealth of that person. There's a lot of, like what's in Sharia, we don't call it, it's not called sariq, it's not theft, it's what's called ghasb. Ghasb is someone who wrongfully takes wealth that belongs to somebody else. It's slightly different to theft. And a lot of that takes place around the point of death of a person. So just as it's an obligation for you to know how to wash and shroud and bury your deceased family, you also must know how to take care of the wealth of that person. So the first thing around the wealth of a person, there are 4 stages there are 4 stages in dealing with the wealth of a person that must be known. The first in dealing with the wealth of the deceased, number 1, with the wealth of the deceased, that person who's died, the funeral costs are to be paid for. The funeral costs are to be paid for. We discussed that. We have discussed that. If somebody else wants to pick up the cost, then it's a sadaqah and it's a blessed thing. But if that person has wealth, he has significant wealth and he has assets and so on that belongs to him, it no longer belongs to him. The moment he dies, he's no longer the malik of that wealth. He's no longer the owner of that wealth. To be owner of wealth, you must be a living person. Once you die, you're no longer the owner of that wealth. But the burial costs first will come from the wealth of that person left behind. If family members want to pay for that, they can do from themselves, but there's no obligation if that person has left wealth. The second, after that's been taken care of, that the wealth that person left behind will be used to pay any debts that he owed. And that's before any inheritance comes into play. It will be used to pay any debts that that person has left behind. We've mentioned this before. Very important. If you have debts and you're writing a will, record your debts on that will. So that when you die, imagine you owe somebody a large amount now. You don't know if you're going to live till tomorrow. You may not have even told people that you owe that person. It needs to be written down. So it's known, so that it's known that you owe that person. Instead of the dispute that will come, that person will come and start asking for his money. And then the inheritors, the family members start disputing. So, we've gone too far ahead. So any debts that you owe, record it in your will. Record it in your will, or inform, let that person, whoever is responsible for your estate when you die, let that person know about those debts. But importantly, whilst you're alive, try and pay off all debts. Because any debts that are outstanding on the day of judgment will stop you from entering into paradise. And the Prophet ﷺ, he refused to pray janazah prayer for a person who owed debts. He refused to pray janazah prayer. Only when somebody came forward and he paid off the debt, he agreed to pay off the debt, would the Prophet ﷺ come forward and pray the janazah prayer. So make sure if you are going to write a will, make sure that you record within it any debts that are outstanding that you owe to a person. The third, you have what's called al-wasiyya. Al-wasiyya, or a bequest, is where you make a statement or you record in your will an amount that is to go to a particular charitable cause. It doesn't even need to be charitable to anybody. You can give it to anybody with one restriction, one key restriction. It can go to a mosque, it can go to a charity organisation, it can go to a friend, it can go to anybody. Well, there are actually two restrictions within this, but that's called wasiyya. That's a wasiyya, a bequest, where you leave a small amount of your wealth to somebody, to anybody, particularly charitable causes. That can be stated, it can be written. If, for example, you tell your son, your eldest son, that I want 1/3 of my wealth to go to that masjid when I die. That's it, that's a wasiyya, that has to be carried out now. That has to be carried out. Or if it's written down, I want 1/3 of my wealth to go to that masjid. And that's 1/3 that goes to that masjid. And that has to be carried out. And that's based upon this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you 1/3 of your wealth at the end of your life as an increase in your deeds. What does that mean? As an increase in your deeds. When you're about to die, we've already said your wealth is not your wealth. You don't decide on your deathbed who gets what. Allah has already decided that for you. That's ayat al-miraf. You don't decide that my son gets this and my daughter gets, and my husband or the wife gets this. That's not in your hands. Allah has fixed that already. What Allah says, you have 1/3 and you can use it any way that you want. 1/3 of your wealth, you have that, that's yours. You decide what's an increase in your deeds, your final act of sadaqah before you leave this world. Your final act of charity before you leave this world. And it's Allah giving you a chance to set down some sadaqah jariyah before you leave this world. But He's giving you 1/3, the remaining 2/3 is not yours to decide. It's not for you to decide where it goes. So that's what's termed wasiyya, a bequest that Allah has allowed you to use to go to any charitable cause anywhere that you want with two restrictions. A person can choose to leave a bequest to anyone provided, number one, it is not more than 1/3 of his wealth. That's based on the hadith we just read. Allah has given you 1/3 of your wealth. The remaining 2/3 does not belong to you when you die. It goes to pay, or debts have already been paid off, it goes to the inheritors. That's the property the inheritors. That's not for you to say. If somebody, when he's dying, he says, I want all of my wealth to go to the masjid. My family are rich, they don't need it. I want all of my wealth. You can't do that. You can't do that. The Prophet set the cap, 1/3, no more. You have the right to use 1/3 of your wealth. And the second, your wasiyah, your bequest, cannot go to an inheritor. Because the Prophet said, La wasiyyata li warithin. There is no bequest to an inheritor. The inheritor already has it. If you're saying, I want 1/3 to go to my son, he's going to get more than 1/3. You say, I want 1/3 to go to my daughter. If she's one, she gets a half. If there's two or more, they get 2/3. They share 2/3 between them. They're already getting a share. If the husband says, I want my 1/3 of this to go to my wife, she's getting her share. She gets 1/4 or 1/8. She has her share. Allah already set down the shares for people who are inheritors. So the Prophet said that you do not leave a bequest of more than 1/3, and you do not leave a bequest to somebody who's an inheritor. However, the ulama have qualified that. They said you cannot leave a bequest to the inheritor unless all of the other inheritors agree to it. Right? If the father says, if the person who dies say, I want 1/3 of my wealth to go to my my daughter, the only daughter. When he dies, what happens then? All the other inheritors are asked, are you okay with that? Are you okay with that? If they're okay with that, then she gets that 1/3 plus the share she will get, plus the share that she will get. So if it is for an inheritor, it needs agreement of the other inheritors. They are the two restrictions that are placed. The other important point about wasiyah, we mentioned debts. Debts are to be cleared from a person's his estate before bequests. But if somebody owes what's termed religious debts, and you have outstanding prayers, you didn't do all your qada in your lifetime, you're going to face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with prayers missing, dangerous thing. You're going to face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you've not paid your zakat. What happens now with all of these things? You must now leave a bequest stating that I have X amount of prayers, or fast, or zakat, X amount of years of zakat to pay off, and I want it to be paid from my wealth. And that is a requirement, but it will come out to 1/3 and no more. It will come out to 1/3 and no more. How much for each prayer and each fast? The equivalent is zakat al-fitr. The equivalent is zakat al-fitr. So if, for example, you're doing all of your qada, and now you're down to, let's say, 1,000 qada, for example. You've got 1,000 prayers remaining. Make sure you record how many prayers in your will. Make sure you record how many fasts that you have left. Make sure you keep a record of it, because it can only be paid off out of your bequest if you record it as such. If you record it as such, and then when you die, as long as it's within the 1/3 of what remains, then it will be paid for because you requested it. So your religious debts needs to be recorded. It needs to be written in your will, where you state how many prayers and how many fasting, how many zakat and other things that you require. You state that, and it will then be paid for from your estate. So your bequest is twofold. The wasiyah is twofold. It's a charitable act that you can use for anything, and it's also to pay for any outstanding acts of worship that you have. After the bequest, now one last thing, inheritance. Inheritance comes at the very end. Inheritance comes after funeral costs have been paid for, after debts have been paid for, and after bequests have been recorded, if any bequests were recorded. Then you move into the realms of inheritance. And the inheritance shares are being detailed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. We've already said you don't have a say in that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set it. In ilm al-mirath, in the science of inheritance, they are known, the first inheritors are known as ashab al-furud. They're the ones who have a fixed share that's been set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we're going to look at one or two of these. We try not to complicate it because it can get complicated. For those who want to go and read up on it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has spoken about inheritance in 3 ayahs in the Quran. Surah An-Nisa, ayah number 11, ayah number 12, and the very last ayah of Surah An-Nisa. Ayah number 11, ayah number 12, and the very last ayah of Surah An-Nisa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives detail about who receives what in terms of inheritance. We've already mentioned this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, learn inheritance because it is from your religion. It is half of knowledge and it is the first knowledge lifted from my notion. But before, we're going to go through 3 examples of how to work out inheritance. We'll just give 3 examples of how to work out inheritance. And they're the more simpler examples. But before looking at that, just a few points of warning. Number 1, and this is a real issue. Inheritance, and even before that, debts and bequests, requires that your property, your assets are known. It requires that they're known. And what that means, and often intentionally it's left confused. You put it onto your son's name, joint ownership and so on. It's often not known, or you don't state clearly who owns what. Especially with families where everybody owns it all together. There's 2 real issues. One, in terms of payment to zakat. Everybody needs to know what they own in order to know what they are required to pay. That's one issue. Second, when that person dies. When that person dies, who actually owns it? Because if it belongs to that person, then it will be divided out. But if it belongs to husband and wife, then it needs to be clear. Is that an equal share, or who actually? There has to be clarity in terms of ownership. Because when that person dies, whatever wealth has been left behind, that's what will be divided. That's what will be divided out. That's the first thing. And there's a lot of confusion in terms of who owns what, particularly within families. The second point about inheritance. While a person is alive, he can do whatever he wants with his wealth. While a person is alive, he can do anything he wants with his wealth. If the father gives away properties that he owns, you can't come and say that's my inheritance. He's not dead. It's only your inheritance when he dies. When he's alive, he can do whatever he wants with it, except for when he becomes terminally ill on his deathbed. At that point, he loses the right to do whatever he wants with it. When he's dying, he can't now say, I want this to go there and that to go. That's no longer in his. But whilst he's alive, you can do whatever you want with your wealth. There's no restriction because it belongs to you at that point. The third point, the deceased whilst he's alive cannot exclude anyone from his inheritance share. Cannot exclude anybody from the inheritance share. As an example, if you've fallen out with a family member and you don't speak to them, you can't put them out of your inheritance. Even though you should be speaking to them. But let's assume you've had a falling out with family members. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's fixed inheritance share. He did not leave that to you. He did not leave that to you. So even though families may have broken up and let's say worst case it's usually brothers, and brothers don't automatically get inheritance. But let's say there's been a falling out with one son he's gone and doing his own thing. He's broken up with the family. When the father dies, he's entitled to his inheritance. If he turns up, he's entitled to his inheritance share. Even though he's never here, he's entitled to his inheritance share. So you cannot exclude anybody that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given an inheritance share, because inheritance shares is not your right. It's not your right. The fourth point, when somebody has died, let's say, and this often happens with the wife, when the wife dies, well, it could be anybody, nobody has a right to come and say that this person gets that and that person gets that, and distributing any way that they want. Like for example, the wife dies in her gold, the husband starts deciding that she'll get this amount of gold and she'll get that amount of gold. That's not his right to do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we repeat, inheritance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's decided who gets what. You have no say whatsoever. You can't exclude people, you can't decide who gets what. You can't decide who gets what. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's decided that. And the last, which is just as important now, women are entitled to their inheritance share and cannot be removed from inheritance. Women are entitled to their inheritance share and cannot be removed from their inheritance, particularly on the argument that the father or the husband, he's required to support her, so she's getting taken care of. Allah is completely aware of that. Allah is completely aware of that, yet despite that, He made a particular point that women get their inheritance share. It's not a coincidence that the 3 verses of inheritance come in the surah called women. Surah An-Nisa. There's a reason for that. And when you look at Ayat al-Mirath, the verses of inheritance, they are there to protect the rights of women to receive their inheritance share. And if women are excluded, that's dhulm against them, and that's their wealth being wrongfully taken from them. So women their share is protected. When you actually look at those who have a fixed share, I think there's 12 women who have a fixed share, there's 7 men who have a fixed share. There's actually more women who have a fixed share than there are men who have a fixed share. So you must always ensure that when it comes to mirath, inheritance, that women are given their share and they are not excluded. The sixth and the final point to mention about before going into 3 examples, there is no inheritance between Muslims and non-Muslims. There is no inheritance between Muslims and non-Muslims, but there can be wasiyyah. So if there's a convert, for example, somebody's become Muslim, he's got a father who's not Muslim, there's no inheritance between them. The Prophet ﷺ said that categorically, clearly said it, لا يرث المسلم الكافر ولا الكافر المسلم. The Muslim does not inherit from the non-Muslim, the non-Muslim does not inherit from the Muslim. That's categorical. The Prophet ﷺ clearly stated that. But you can have wasiyyah. You can have a bequest, like that convert, he has a family member who dies, he can leave 1/3 of that wealth, or he can receive 1/3 of the wealth, or he can leave 1/3 of his wealth, if he's to die, to a non-Muslim family member. But he cannot receive inheritance, and inheritance cannot be given. So there are 6 points to consider. There are 6 points to consider when looking at inheritance. Now when we look at example, we're going to look at 3 examples on inheritance just to show how it works, and let's hope it's understood. It's not straightforward, but let's hope it's understood. How inheritance shares are divided depends upon which family members are present. It depends. There's a long list of who's entitled to shares, but the key ones, the ones that will always receive inheritance: father and mother, sons and daughters, husband and wife. They will always receive an inheritance share. How much they receive depends, but they will always receive inheritance share. Father and mother will always receive a share of the inheritance. For example, not to get too detailed about this, but as an example, the mother shall receive 1/3 or 1/6, depends on who's present. The daughter shall receive a half of the inheritance share. If she's only one, she'll receive 2/3, split equally between them if there's more than one daughter. So it depends on how many's present. Husband will receive a half or a quarter, depends on whether they've got children, a half or a quarter. Wife will receive a quarter or an eighth. So the amount that they receive depends upon who's present. But these 6, father, mother, sons and daughters, husband and wife, they will always receive inheritance. Beyond that, it depends. Beyond that, like grandparents in some cases will receive, grandchildren in some cases will receive, brothers and sisters deceased in some cases will receive, extended family, the wider family in some cases will receive, but there's no guarantee. These 6, they're guaranteed always for receiving inheritance share. Father, mother, son, daughter, husband and wife, they will always receive inheritance. And the examples we're going to look at are going to revolve around these 6. The amount that each one receives will vary depending on who is present. Before looking at 3 examples, just to note this ayah. آباؤكم وأبناؤكم لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا. You don't know which of your parents or your children is more beneficial to you. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say that? And He said that at the end of verse 11, Surah An-Nisa, when He spoke about the share of the daughters, and He spoke about the share of the mother. And by extension, through that, we understand the share of the father and the sons. Why did He say that? Because in your mind, you think that this son of mine should get more, or my father should be entitled to more, or this person should be entitled to more. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you don't really know how to divide it up. You don't really know how to divide. You're taking into your hand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, I will do it in the most perfect and just way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most fair in everything that He does. In everything that He does. And that's why He ends the ayah with, Inna Allah kana aliman hakima. Aliman hakima. He ends the first ayah by saying that He is all knowledgeable and He's the most wise. He's the most knowledgeable and He's the most wise. Allah is the most fair in terms of distributing. We're going to look at 3 examples. Okay. We're going to look at some examples. These are scenarios. The first one, individual by the name of Ahmed, he dies. In this case, he has no debts and he has no will left behind, which means that we're going to go straight to inheritance. Because the first was burial cost, and then any debts that he has to pay off will be paid off, and then we look at anything that he's recorded in his will. None of those exist, so we go directly to inheritance shares. So in this case, Ahmed, he's died, he has no debts and no will, he has assets and wealth of 80,000. And when we speak about assets and wealth, it means everything that he owns. Everything that he owns. It could be land, it could be property, it could be anything. Savings that he has, everything must be gathered together, the value of his worked out, and then we look at how it's going to be shared out. So in this case, Ahmed dies, he has no debts and no will, he has assets and wealth of 80,000, and there's a reason why I mentioned 80,000, which we'll see next. Ahmed leaves one wife, one son. Ahmed leaves behind one wife and one son. You see in those diamonds there, based upon the ayah, if there's a child, the wife gets 1/8. If there's no children, the wife gets 1/4. In this case, Ahmed has a son. Ahmed has a son, therefore the wife will receive 1/8. Then we look at the son. What's the share of the son? The son, in that diamond there, that's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, "Alhiq al-fara'id bi ahliha." Give inheritance shares to those who are entitled, and whatever remains is for the nearest male. And the nearest male to the deceased is always the son. The son is the nearest male. So in a case where you got wife and a son and nobody else, the wife gets 1/8 because the son. Otherwise she would have got 1/4, and then the rest goes to the son. Because the Prophet said, give the inheritance to those entitled, the wife is entitled to 1/8. The rest goes to the nearest male he being the son. So what happens in this case? The wife gets 1/8, the remaining 7/8 goes to the son. The remaining 7/8 goes to the son, and that's why in this case, that's why we did 80,000. The wife receives 10,000, the son receives the remaining 70,000. That's a simple example. The wife, the ayah in the Quran, ayah 12 states, if there are children, no children, she gets 1/4. If there are children, she gets 1/8. And then the hadith, the Prophet said, give those entitled to the share their share, and whatever remains is to the nearest male. And the nearest male is a son, so the nearest male gets what's left over. So in that example, 10,000 to the wife, and the remaining 7/8, 70,000 goes to the son. Another example. This one's slightly more detailed, because we want to look at additional points. Fatima, she dies. She owes a friend of hers 5,000. In her will, she's written that she wants all of her gold to go to her daughter. Now remember what we said before. She can't do that. She can't do that. One, because maximum 1/3. She only has a right on 1/3. Second, there's no inheritance, but there's no bequest to inheritors, and the daughter is an inheritor unless the other inheritors agree to it. So she doesn't have the right to give all of the gold to her daughter. And then the third point, all that she has left behind is gold worth 10,000. So what happens in this case? She's left behind a husband, a son and a daughter. Husband, son and a daughter. Again, the point we mentioned, the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, and that's in the diamond there, La wasiyyata liwarithin. There is no bequest to an inheritor. She did not have the right to give all of the gold to the daughter. She did not have that right. The Prophet ﷺ removed that right from her. And in this case, the husband and the son did not agree to it. It needs their agreement, and they did not agree that the daughter receives. Here to note, if in this case the husband and the daughter said, we're fine, she can have all the gold, then that's fine. Then there's no issue. But here in this case, the husband and the daughter did not agree to it. So that's cancelled. The bequest is then cancelled. What then happens? The gold must be sold. The gold must be sold, and with the money, it'll be distributed out between the husband, son and daughter. What's the inheritance share of the husband, son and daughter? Well, the first thing before that, she owed her friend 5,000. That has to be dealt with first. Debts are paid off first. Debt is paid before inheritance shares. The bequest is invalid in this case. So first we go to the debt, and then we go to the inheritance shares. The friend is paid the 5,000. The remaining 5,000 is then distributed between the husband and the son and daughter. Here we have now the rule. The husband, he gets a half if there's no children, a quarter if there's children. Here we have son and daughter. So the husband will get a half, and that's stated in ayah number 12 in Surah An-Nisa. So her husband receives a quarter. What about the son and daughter? The son and daughter, they share what's left over. What's left over, the quarter, the 3/4 that's left, is shared equally, not equally, is shared between the son and the daughter, but the Quran gives a principle, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. The male has double the share of the female. The male has double the share of the female, which means the 3/4 is divided between the son and daughter. The son gets 2 shares and the daughter gets 1. Out of this, the son gets 2/4 and the daughter gets 1/4. So in that division now, husband gets 1/4, the son gets a half, 2/4, and the daughter gets the remaining 1/4. So here, the final share, 5,000 was left over. A quarter of that goes to the husband, 1,250. Half of it goes to the son, 2,500, and the daughter gets the other quarter, 1,250. So the 5,000 that was left, a quarter went to the husband, the remaining 3/4, 2 shares go to the son, 1 share goes to the daughter, that's 2/4, which is a half, and a quarter, which is for the daughter. The third and the last example, just to show how it works. These are the simplest examples, there's a lot more complicated ones, but this is as simple as it gets. Aisha dies. Her property and wealth is valued at 600,000. Her property and wealth is valued at 600,000. When she died, she had father and mother who are elderly. Father and mother will always inherit. Father and mother who are elderly, she never got married. She has 2 brothers and 2 sisters. She has father and mother, no husband, 2 brothers and 2 sisters. In the diamond, it gives us a principle with inheritance. Brothers and sisters do not inherit if there's a father and mother who are alive. Brothers and sisters do not inherit if there's father and mother who are alive. If there was no father and mother and there's no son, then the brother and sister would inherit. And there's detailed rules that set this up. But because of the father and mother, the brothers and the sisters do not inherit. However, she has no debts, but she wants 1/3 of her wealth shared equally between her siblings. She has the right to do that. Now here, we said inheritors, they don't receive bequests, but here the brothers and sisters are not inheriting. So they're entitled, she can leave 1/3 of the wealth to the brothers and sisters, and here she's entitled to divide it equally. If the brothers and sisters were inheritors, the brothers would have got double share to the sisters. They would have got double. But here they're not receiving inheritance, they're receiving a bequest. So Aisha, she has a right to give them whatever she wants, as long as it's not more than 1/3. So what happens in this case? Out of 600,000, 1/3 is 200,000. 200,000, she says equal share, which means it we split equally between them, 50,000 each between the 2 brothers and 2 sisters, because she stated that, she stipulated that. And then the rest, the father and the mother, they receive the share of what remains, double the share for the father over the mother. The mother receives 1/3 and the father receives 2/3. So the male has double the share of the female. The remaining 400,000 shared between the parents at a ratio of 2 to 1. The father receives 1/3 or 2/3 of what remains, and the mother receives 1/3 of what remains, which comes to those figures. That's just to give you some insight into how it works. To get to know this more, you need to study the details of inheritance more, but just to get an idea of what happens in the case of inheritance. The key thing, the last thing to mention, to hadith one we've already mentioned, again to reiterate, because we've only given 3 examples, just a simple introduction into it. And the key thing that we want to note is the 4 processes that you have to go through. Burial cost, debts are paid off, and then any bequests that are left, and then inheritance comes into it. The Prophet ﷺ, he's foretelling our times now when he said, learn inheritance and teach it to people, because I am a person who will pass away, and knowledge will be taken. Tribulations will appear until 2 people will dispute our inheritance and will not find anybody to resolve it. Why? Because of the hadith that we mentioned before, the first hadith, it's the first knowledge that we remove from this ummah. And we're almost there. You ask, even people of knowledge, you go and ask them, like, how do you share out this inheritance? Many of them won't know, because it's not something studied extensively. It's something that should be learned, it's a knowledge that should be revived in this ummah. That's just an insight into wills and inheritance. Remember the very first hadith that we read, the Prophet ﷺ said it's not permitted for somebody who believes in Allah on the last day that they sleep for 2 days without a will. Without a will. Bear in mind what we said, and if there's any questions we'll take it. And also, and I mentioned this to one of the organisers before, if anybody wants specific help in terms of a will or knowing how to deal with it, we're welcome to discuss that. Just send an email through or send a message through. If you have people of knowledge in the community here who can help us, that's all the better. If not, then send it through and inshallah we'll try and help with cases. But learn about these and realise that Allah has put a responsibility on you in these matters. Wallahu a'lam. Are there any questions on wills and inheritance? Yes, sister? Why do men get double the share? Say again? Is it just about husband and wife, or generally why? On the general principle that male gets double the share of the female. It's on the general principle. That's not just for husband and wife. Pretty much all cases, like the father gets double the share of the mother, son gets double the share of the daughter, brother gets double the share of the sister. And the hikmah, the wisdom that they mentioned about that, he said was that the male has a responsibility to taking care of the females, not the other way around. The man, although he receives double the share, let's assume, for example, an extended family, he's got his mother, he's got sisters who are not married and so on. They're all his responsibility. He has to financially take care of them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's the most just of all of them. He's put responsibilities on man to take care of the women folk in his family, but because of that he's given him more share than the female in terms of inheritance. Wallahu a'lam. David, you had your hand up?
Yeah, if there's only one inheritor, can you make requests to that inheritor?
If there's only one inheritor, can you make requests for him? If, other than husband and wife, that inheritor would receive it all anyway. It's something that's known as a rad in inheritance, which is redistribution. As an example, if the person only died with one daughter, and that's it. Normally, one daughter by herself will receive half the inheritance, but there's nobody else. She will receive the whole. Except for husband and wife. Husband and wife, if a woman dies and she only has a husband, then he will get half, but he wouldn't receive the other half. The other half is dealt with in other ways, but it wouldn't automatically go to him. In that case, then, if she was to expect that to happen, and she knows she's got no family, then she could record it and request that I want my husband to receive everything. Then it would be valid. Allah. No.
You said when alive a person can do whatever he wishes with his wealth.
Yeah.
So what is the ruling, or is it right for a father to give to one son and exclude the other whilst he's alive?
It's preferable not to, but it's his choice. It's preferable. Like sharing it equally between his sons and daughters, for example, during his life. Gifting it equally. It's better to do so, but it's not a requirement. It's his wealth, and he can do whatever he wants with it. If he's doing it to intentionally exclude, there may be some issues with that, but ultimately it belongs to him. He has the right to do that, and he's not legally, that cannot be cancelled if he did that, as long as it's clearly been transferred to that person. Allah. It's his right to do that when he's alive. Any other questions? Yeah.
Shaykh, in the last example, Aisha died, she left 600,000, and parents are both alive for the elderly. So because she hasn't married, there's no inheritance for anybody apart from the parents. Is that correct?
In that example, yeah, because the automatic inheritors, or those who are always guaranteed inheritance, we said was father, mother, son and daughter, and husband and wife. So here, because there's no family through marriage, then it's just the guaranteed inheritance of father and mother. And then they said you have what's called an inheritance al-hajib. The brother and sister, what's said mahjub. They're blocked out by the presence of the father and mother. If there's no father and mother, then the brother and sister would have inherited.
So the father got 266, the mother got 133. The remaining 400,000, how was that separated?
2/3, 1/3. So we divided 2/3, 1/3.
2/3 for the brother, and
for the father.
No, sorry. The remaining 400,000.
Yeah.
How would that separate?
Now, what happened
between
first
the
in that
brothers and
is
the sisters?
No, that didn't go to the brothers and sisters. That was to the parents,
Right.
because the bequest was to the brothers and sisters, because they didn't get inheritance. And that was 1/3, because she stated that, and that was split equally because she stated that, because they're not inheriting, for example. 2/3 is left over, which is 400,000, and that's now divided between father and mother, a ratio of 2 to 1. So the male has double the share of the female. Allah. Yeah?
If the person was terminally ill,
Yeah.
they were alive, but they requested something whilst they were terminally ill, does that change them? Or is that
No, it doesn't. If they bequest, no, they can leave a bequest, but what they can't do is give away wealth at that point. Like the point that Qari Salimi mentioned here, that couldn't happen. If, for example, at the point they're terminally ill, he decides, I'll give all of my wealth and my assets to my eldest son. He could have done that whilst he was alive and not terminally ill, but not when he's terminally ill. At that point, any gifts that he gives away, or anything that he gives away, has become a bequest, and a bequest can't go to inheritors. So any other bequest, yes, you could do that at that point. Allah. Any other questions on the floor? How can you calculate how many qada salahs you need to be completed? You have to try and estimate, but they said overestimate. And you estimate from the point where you became baligh, when you became an adult, from that point onwards. If you've not been praying for a while, you still need to do it, even though it may turn out to be a large number. You still need to try and estimate, and once you've done that, then overestimate. I add more onto it just to be safe with your prayers. And then before even thinking about this, how much should I have to pay? Do your qadas. It was in micro madrasa just last week, somebody was asking, can I start setting up a standing order now to pay off my qadas? You know, pray your qadas and then pay for your qadas on your deathbed. And whilst you're alive, you must make every effort to do as much of them as possible. This is only there on your deathbed when you've tried your utmost to pray as many as you can and there's still some left over. But just bear in mind, the idea of facing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with prayers missing. It's not something you want to deal with. You want to get through as much of them as possible. It's a terrifying thought to be thought about facing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You've got all of those prayers. So it's not just as simple as like, let's write it down. But this is just a last resort. You've tried your best, and at the end of it, just make a note of how many prayers you've got, and then pay for it on your deathbed. Allah. Any other questions?
Just a quick question with regards to Isali Sawab. What is the ruling with regards to performing Isali Sawab on specific days, i.e. 4th, 15th and the 40th day after burial?
That's something that's introduced by people. That's not, as far as I'm aware, I don't know it's from the Sunnah. There's no harm in doing that. There's no harm in having them on set days, but from what I know, it's not. I may be wrong, I may be incorrect, and if somebody's aware of something else, then but as far as I'm aware, it's not from the Sunnah, but there's no harm in doing it because it's become a practice of many of the Muslims. And what the Prophet said was that whatever the Muslims deem to be good is good with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there is some basis for it as a practice that was introduced. Allahu Akbar. There's a written question here: is Islam having life insurance allowed? Not related, but life insurance, no. Life insurance is not allowed. Life insurance is not allowed. Insurance generally is not allowed except for exceptional cases. Car insurance is because of legal requirements. Car insurance because of legal requirements. The life insurance, no. Can we pay into a pension which you are not guaranteed to get? You can do. The idea, the general principle of pension is that it's allowed. That's if you say that there's no guarantee of getting it, it's the same as just opening a saving account where you're just storing money away, just for your old age, and you never get to old age. It's the same idea. So it's, even though you can't access it whilst you're up until you get to pension, at the age where you can receive your pension, it's just the same idea. Just having almost like a safe where you stored money away that you're not going to touch until old age. It's the same idea. So in principle, pension is allowed. There are certain issues around more specific issues around it in terms of what it's used for, which is the biggest problem with pension. But in principle, it's a lot. Okay, so we'll do this one last one. I owe someone money, but they've stated that should I die, I'll let you off. However, once you've died, they want the money back. Well, the first thing is, how do you know they want the money back when you die? That's one point. How do you know? Is that just an assumption? If somebody waives a debt, they can't reclaim that debt after that. The only thing I'm unsure about here is that it's a conditional waiving of debts, that if you die, then I've let you off with that debt. So in principle, like waiving a debt, that person, if somebody owes you money and you say to them, I've let you off, you don't need to pay me back, you can't go back like 6 months later and say, I want my debt. Once you've waived that debt, it's gone. It's gone. So that in principle should be the same here. So even if they come back and say we want that money, if it's confirmed that they waived that debt, then it wouldn't hold as a debt anymore. The only thing that I'm uncertain about, and I don't, is that it's conditional upon that person dying. I'm not totally certain if the waiving still happens in that case. We done? Any final questions?
You mentioned in the first section that your family members in the barzakh will be able to see good and bad.
Yeah.
Just elaborate on that.
Yeah. We'll be able to see good and bad.
Yeah, what you do.
The hadith shows that the hadith states that they are shown your deeds, and if it's good, it makes them happy and pleased in the barzakh, because there's a life in the barzakh, there's a real existence there. But if you're doing haram and they're showing it, then it embarrasses them. It makes them feel like sad and embarrassed in the barzakh, because others may well become aware of it. What's interesting about that is that you can hide your actions from your parents in this world, but when you're in the grave you can't. Your parents don't, you can get away with a lot without them knowing what you're getting up to. But in the barzakh it's shown to them, it's displayed to them, they're made aware of it. Allah. Yeah?
We've got two questions.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, at what age do children inherit? Or is it at any age?
Any age, it's any age. There's even a discussion about an unborn child. It's not a discussion, an unborn child. If a husband dies and the wife is pregnant, at that point there's an inheritance share for the unborn child. But then they have some details about how that's calculated depending on whether it's a male or female is born. So any age, any age.
And the other question was, if someone has taken out a loan, for example, a student loan or a bank loan, do the family have to pay that back after the business has run?
The family, it's not the family's responsibility to pay debts. It's not the family's responsibility to pay debts. It's debts out of the estate of that person. And here, like I think with student loan, it's waived when it automatically gets cancelled when a person dies. With a bank, if you owe money to the bank will pursue it. The bank does pursue debts that you owe them, but they pursue it out of assets that you have. They legally, Islamically, there's a separate point we should touch upon, but if somebody dies and has no wealth left behind, and somebody comes and claims for it, it's not the responsibility of the family, because it wasn't the debt of the family. They can't come to the son or the husband if the wife dies and says that your husband or your father owed us money. If they have money, then so be it. If not, then if they want to pay, they can to help them in the barzakh. But there's no obligation upon the rest of the family to pay. And the same way with banks. Banks will pursue from assets that you have, but they won't pursue from others. Allah. Anything else? Yeah.
Couple questions, Shaykh. Is a blood or organ donation allowed? So when you're alive, or actually when you die, for strangers or family?
I don't know the answer to that.
Second question is, if someone's in a coma and then you're kept alive artificially, should they be continued to
I don't know the
kept
answer
alive
to
if you
that.
don't know?
I don't know the answer to those questions. Allah. We're done. Alhamdulillah.